Hey, Larken Rose here, and I have a simple question for you. Sort of two questions. A question with two parts. Let's put it that way. So, there has been talk for a while now of the feds considering doing a tax on unrealized gains. Capital tax, part of the income tax, I believe. Now, there's lots of discussion about how insane and bonkers that is, and it is, but so is all taxation. In this case, it's especially bonkers, and I actually think on the legal side of things, which matters not at all, they're going to have problems getting away with this crap because of their own prior rules and rulings of their own crappy court system. Basically, how it works is you buy a thing and you have a thing. And then you still have the thing, and they decide that having the thing and then still having the thing means you have to give them a bunch of money. Not as a property tax, which is a similar bogus idea, that you buy your house, and then for the privilege of the government not stealing your house, you have to pay them lots of money every year. That's called property taxes. This, in practical terms, is something similar, but conceptually, it's even more bonkers and insane because they're saying you buy a thing and you have a thing and you still have the thing, but we think the value of that thing measured in dollars, which are constantly going down in value, we think you have to pay taxes on what we say is the increased value of the thing as measured by a currency that's constantly going down in value, the dollar. So it really is as bonkers as you own a thing, you still own a thing, that counts as income. Well, it's the same thing it already was. Now that counts as income because we decided by our measurements that now it's worth more, so we're going to tax you on the income you didn't get for still having the exact same thing you had before when we said its value was different. Now, like I said, I think they're going to have a lot of legal problems because of 8 million court cases about what counts as income that you can tax at all under any income tax. And I'm not going to get into that whole thing of how they totally misrepresent those taxes to a massive degree. That's a different issue. But even under their own stupid rules, I think they're going to have problems getting away with this. But my question isn't even about the technicalities or the insanity of trying to say it's income if you have a thing and then you still have the same thing. That counts as income. You didn't sell it. It's not a matter of you bought it for this many dollars and then you sold it for more and the difference is capital gains. That already exists. And they already call that income and capital gains and they already tax that. No, now they want to tax you having the same thing because they say it's worth more dollars even when you haven't sold it. You haven't gotten anything from it. It's just still what it already was. They want to call that income. Legally, logically, morally, it's totally bonkers. But that's actually beside the point of the question I want to ask. But that particular example of the greed and insanity of the political parasites is a perfect opportunity to ask this question. How much of this shit are you going to put up with? I don't mean how much do they have to do before you're going to petition them or beg them or ask them to not do that? Or maybe in a few years vote for some other crook who's going to do it to you anyway. I mean, at what point do you say, okay, screw you, I'm not playing your game. I'm just not doing it. Now, the reason there are two parts to that question is the first part is for those of you who feel a patriotic duty to pay your taxes, to hand over money to political crooks so they can continue their warmongering over there and their Ponzi schemes at home and buying favors and doing things that have nothing to do with you and aren't at all in your interests, but they assure you is your fair share. For those of you who feel morally obligated to hand over a chunk of what you earn and what you have, is there a limit to that? Like if tomorrow they pass a law and say, okay, we're going to have 100% tax on all property and all income. Everything you have, give it to us. Now, Not saying that's a possibility, because even they aren't that stupid. But if they did that, would you go, well, gosh darn, we have to pay our taxes. It's our patriotic duty. Or would you say, no, go screw yourself. I'm not handing over all my money. So unless you're absolutely bonkers and a slave start to finish, at 100% you'd say, screw you, I don't have an obligation to give you literally everything I have. So we're below 100% currently, but we're above 0%. So somewhere in there, is there a line at which you say, I'm not obligated to give this to you, and regardless of your laws, regardless of the tax rates that you, the political parasites, decided, you declaring that you get to decide how much of what I earn I will be allowed to keep. By the way, there's a word for that. It's called slavery. When somebody else gets to decide how much of what you earn you're going to be allowed to keep, that's called slavery. That person owns you. If it's up to them whether to let you have anything or how much to let you have, you're their property. Now, they'll use lots of different terms. No, this is representative government and everybody paying their fair share of the blah, 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 blah. Are you really that gullible that all they have to do is describe slavery with different words and then you'll think it's legitimate? If somebody else gets to decide how much you get to keep of what you are voluntarily paid by someone you did work for or sold something to, that person is in charge of your life. You're not. But at the moment, I'm just asking, at what point do you decide, yeah, I'm not obligated to do this anymore? 30% tax, 100%, 90%? If they say, well, you only have to give us 9/10 of what you earn, are you going to go, well, it's my duty. I wouldn't want to be a law-breaking tax evader. Oh, shameful. Or at 90%, would you say, okay, screw you. This is ridiculous. I'm not handing it over anymore. Where do you draw the line? Now, I'm not even going to tell you where you should draw the line. I'm just asking, first of all, do you have a line anywhere? Because it's a pretty high line already if you're putting up with this, if you still think you're obligated to. Now, we'll get to the second part of the question in a couple seconds, which is, even if you know you're not obligated to, you may go along with it to not get robbed and caged and things like that. But that's the second part. First part is just, when are you morally obligated to hand over money to political parasites who say, well, this is the cost of society and yada, 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 and the cost of the infrastructure and blah, 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 and all this bullshit we're going to spew out to make you think you're obligated to pay tribute to a bunch of political crooks. So at what point do you stop believing that? 1%? Well, we're way the hell beyond 1%. If today you think you're obligated to pay morally obligated to pay your taxes, the line's already pretty damn high, 20, 30, 40%, depending on your income level, might even be worse. At what point do you no longer think you have a moral obligation to hand the fruits of your labor over to a bunch of lying political scumbags? Democrat and Republican, makes no difference to me. At what point do you say, okay, I don't have to do this anymore? This isn't okay anymore that you're making me hand over that much. Is there a line anywhere? Now, I can tell you my line. I'm not telling you what your line is. I'm asking you what your line. My line is anything above 0. If somebody demands a penny from me without my consent and we didn't agree to anything, that's already immoral. It's not a very big offense, but yeah, stealing a penny is still stealing. It's still unjust. So any taxation, if you ask me, or if you can grasp moral principles, is immoral. It's theft. It's extortion. But if you believe it's legitimate, what are the limits? At what point do you no longer feel an obligation to hand it over? A moral obligation. Okay, so that's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, assuming either we've already gotten past the point at which you feel obligated to hand it over, or at some point we could theoretically get past that point where you're going to say, okay, I don't feel morally obligated, but I may still pay up because I'm scared of what they're going to do. If I don't, they may take my business, they may take my house, they may put me in a cage, they may wipe out my bank account, whatever. If you're one of the many people who go along with the extortion racket out of self-preservation, first of all, I totally sympathize. It sucks that you have to make that choice. It's the same as if you lived in some city ruled by the mafia and they said, well, we're going to come break your kneecaps, you know, person running this little shop, if you don't give us 20% or whatever cut they're asking. We're going to beat the hell out of you if you don't hand it over. You might choose to hand it over as opposed to, you know, getting the crap beat out of you. Doesn't make it okay what they're doing, but you may choose that just to try to make your life a little bit easier, even though you're still getting robbed. So for those of you who don't feel morally obligated to hand over your money to the state, at what point does it stop being worth it for you to cooperate? Because if they said 100% taxation, give us everything you have, at that point you can't say, well, I better go along with it for my own good. What own good? You won't have anything. You'll all the way be homeless and broke. And so at 100%, I'm hoping somewhere between now and 100%, you'd say, okay, screw this. Complying isn't even worth it. Trying to stay out of trouble isn't worth it because complying does more harm than saying screw you and taking my chances. So, and again, I'm not going to tell you when to do it. I'm not telling people to be martyrs. But I am asking the question, at what point between 0% and 100% would you say, okay, going along with this crap is no longer worth it? Not playing this game anymore, whether you're going to, you know, just give up your business or do things under the table or whatever you decide to do, or just, I'm going to run my business, I'm not going to give them my money, and if they come to collect with men with guns or they come to stick me in a cage, well, I'll decide what to do then. However you're going to disobey, my question now is, what's the percentage at which you'll disobey? And here's the important part of that question. Is there a percentage or does it move based on where you are now? The American Revolution was over like 3 or 4% taxation, not on income, there was no such thing, but on like importation of tea and pieces of paper. That was it. They had a revolution over tiny little excise taxes on importing a couple particular things. And they said, nope, this is unbearable. We're going to have a revolution. Well, now we're literally many hundreds times worse than that. And most Americans are like, oh, I guess we just have to go along with it. And again, I can sympathize with people who don't want to get themselves in trouble by disobeying. But at some point, it's literally more trouble to obey. It's literally more trouble to comply. And we saw that in the last few years when in some places in the US, they did the absolutely ridiculous, counterproductive, unnecessary, completely worthless shutdowns. And a bunch of people were like, well, I don't want to go against the law. I better do as I'm told. A lot of those people are still out of business and they're unemployed because they obeyed. Okay, what did compliance get you? Other people disobeyed. Some of them got in trouble, some of them didn't. A lot of them are still in business because they disobeyed. You were punished if you obeyed by having your business crash and burn because you've shut it down when they told you to. And a lot of people who said, screw you, I don't care what the governor says, I'm going to stay in business. They did better. They were rewarded for their disobedience. So if you're talking like income tax level, 0, 100%, somewhere in between, compliance punishes you more than disobedience. So where's that line? So these are two different lines. At what point do you no longer feel morally obligated to hand it over? And then at what point do you realize, just practically speaking, just logistically, at some point, compliance with their insane psychotic demands from these political parasites, compliance will hurt you more than disobedience. So, just a two-part question. Where do you stop feeling an obligation to pay tribute to these lying scumbags? And where will you actually stop paying tribute to them because you realize compliance is no longer a safer choice for you, and disobedience and resistance actually becomes safer? For a whole lot of people, we're already approaching that, or we've already passed it, where their lives have been destroyed because they went along with it. Now, last thing I'll mention is it's always a balancing act. Because on an individual level, if one person says, I'm not going along with this, I'm going to disobey, I'm going to stand up, the state usually has the resources to stomp on that person. Sometimes literally drive a tank over him or something. Sometimes just financially ruin him and put him out of business. So on an individual basis, a lot of people understandably choose to go along with this shit. Well, guess what? If every single individual goes along with it because they're scared to be the first to stand up, there is no limit to how much the politicians will rob you. 50%, 70, 80, 90%. Why wouldn't they do that if all of the human livestock is going to go along with it because none of them dare to be the first to stand up? So individually, yeah, it may, at least in the short term, be to your benefit to quietly go along with the immoral crap they're demanding of you. In the long run, it hurts everybody if all the individuals decided to go along with it. So, just going to end on that question. Where do you no longer feel morally obligated to obey? Which to me is 0%. Anything above that, that's immoral automatically. Taxation is inherently immoral. And at what percentage are you going to refuse to comply, knowing that it may be risky because you realize that at some point compliance is more harmful and more dangerous than disobedience? And for me and a whole lot of people, we're still trying to guess where that line is and guess the best way, because I have no obligation to pay a dime to these parasitical bastard warmongering assholes. But in lots of cases, I will do it to avoid getting my kneecap smashed. Same thing with the mafia controlling some city. And in other cases, I will do what I can to get around that and not do it. So that's the question. How much of this shit are you going to put up with? If they decide to tell everybody, hey, we're doing an unrealized gains tax, you have to pay an income tax on everything you owned and already owned because we said it went up in value. So even if you didn't earn $1 this year, you're unemployed, well, we're going to say your house went up and your car went up and whatever other things we're going to decide that counts as capital gains because you had a thing and you still have a thing, and we're going to charge you income tax on still having the thing you already had. We're going to call that income. You going to put up with that shit? At what point are you not going to put up with that shit anymore? That's the question for you individually and for the country as a whole, and actually for the world as a whole. How much of this shit are you going to put up with before, first of all, you say, I'm not morally obligated to go along with this crap. I may to avoid trouble. And then second, at what point are you going to say, it's not even worth trying to go along with it? It does more harm to obey these parasitical bastards than it does to say, fuck you. You can't have my money, and if you come for it, bad things are going to happen to you. So what line do you have for that? Or will you go all the way to 100% and you will give them everything you own and everything you earn in order to be a law-abiding taxpayer and avoid trouble? Because if you don't have anything, you didn't avoid trouble. You lost everything. So what is it? Feel free to put it in the comments below. Where do you stop feeling the moral obligation? And where do you stop stinking complying? And by the way, if 10% stopped today, that's the end of the empire. Even if 90% are like, I don't dare to stop. So where are you going to draw the line? And each person has to decide for themselves. I'm not even telling you where to draw the line. Just asking. At what point are you going to say, okay, I'm not begging for lower taxes anymore. I'm not voting for somebody else. I'm just not paying tribute to these parasitical piles of shit anymore.